What if the single biggest lie you have ever been sold is that successful people are simply more motivated than you, that the athletes who train before the sun rises, the entrepreneurs who grind for years without recognition, the writers who produce work after work without waiting for the mood to strike are just running on some special reserve of passion and energy you were never given? That belief, that comfortable, convenient belief, is the reason most people will never build the life they are capable of living. Because it lets you off the hook. It tells you that discipline is a gift, not a decision. That some people are just built differently, and you are not one of them. And as long as you hold on to that story, you will keep waiting for motivation to arrive before you take action. You will keep negotiating with yourself every single morning. You will keep watching other people build the life you want, convinced they have access to something you do not. Here is the truth. Motivation is a visitor. It comes and goes, without warning, without schedule, and without loyalty. Discipline, on the other hand, is a system. It is an architecture you build deliberately, decision by decision, day by day, until it runs on its own. And once that system is in place, you no longer need to feel ready to act. You no longer need inspiration. You no longer need perfect conditions. You simply do what you built yourself to do. This audiobook is not going to motivate you. Motivation is everywhere, and it is cheap. What this audiobook is going to do is something far more powerful. It is going to teach you how to build self-discipline from the ground up, how to rewire your brain at a neurological level, so that doing hard things becomes your default, not your exception. Every strategy in this audiobook is backed by neuroscience, behavioral psychology, and the real patterns of people who have trained themselves to operate at the highest level. No empty inspiration, no vague advice, just a precise, honest, science-backed blueprint for becoming the kind of person who does not negotiate with themselves, who does not ask whether they feel like doing the work, because the work is simply what they do. If you are ready to stop waiting and start building, then let us begin. Chapter 1. The Myth of Motivation. Why willpower is a lie, and what actually drives elite performance. Let's start by destroying the most dangerous idea that has ever been planted in your mind. The idea that the people who achieve extraordinary things, the ones who wake up early, who train hard, who build businesses from nothing, who create relentlessly, who show up day after day without fail, are doing it because they feel like it, because they are more motivated than everyone else, because they have access to some deep, burning internal fire that keeps them going when others quit. That idea is not just wrong. It is the exact mechanism that keeps most people stuck in permanent mediocrity, waiting for a feeling that may never come, using its absence as a reason to stay still. Here is what motivation actually is. It is an emotional state, and like all emotional states, it is temporary, it is unpredictable, and it is completely unreliable as a foundation for any serious endeavor. Motivation spikes when you discover a new goal, when you watch an inspiring video, when someone tells you a story that lights something up inside you. And then, within hours or days, it fades. Life gets in the way. The work gets boring. The results take longer than expected. The discomfort becomes real. And the motivation that felt so powerful just days ago evaporates completely. If your execution depends on how you feel, then your entire life is at the mercy of your mood. And your mood is influenced by sleep, by diet, by social interactions, by the weather, by 100 variables you cannot control. Building your future on motivation is like building a house on sand. It works beautifully right up until the moment it does not. Now look at the people who actually achieve the things they set out to achieve. Look closely, and you will notice something that almost nobody talks about. They are not more motivated than you. They are not running on a higher level of passion. In fact, most of them will tell you openly that there are days, sometimes entire weeks, when they absolutely do not want to do the work, when getting up feels pointless, when continuing feels impossible, when every logical argument says to stop, rest, or quit. The difference is not that they feel differently from you. The difference is that they act regardless of how they feel. They have removed the negotiation. They have eliminated the moment of choice. They have made the decision in advance, so that when the feeling of resistance arrives, and it always arrives, there is nothing left to decide. This is what willpower is actually about, and this is also where most people fundamentally misunderstand it. Willpower is not a magical force you either have or you do not. It is a limited cognitive resource, and science has shown us that it depletes like a battery throughout the course of a day. Every decision you make, every moment you have to actively override an impulse or resist a temptation, drains that resource. This is called decision fatigue, and it is the reason that judges give harsher sentences later in the day, that people make worse financial choices in the afternoon than in the morning, and that your resolve to eat well collapses reliably every evening, even when it held strong all day. You cannot rely on willpower as your primary mechanism, because it was never designed for that role. Willpower is a short-term override tool. It is not an execution system. Using willpower to build discipline is like using a candle to light a city. The flame is real, but it was never built for that scale. So what do elite performers actually use? They use systems. They use structure. They use pre-commitment, the act of making decisions in advance, so that in the moment when resistance is highest, the decision has already been made and all that remains is execution. An elite athlete does not decide each morning whether to train. The decision was made months ago when they committed to the season. A prolific writer does not decide each day whether to write. They have a time block, a word count, a seat, and a process that begins automatically at the same hour every single day. The negotiation was removed long before the moment of action ever arrived. And what happens when you remove the negotiation is remarkable. You stop spending mental energy on whether to act, and you redirect all of that energy into how to act. You stop fighting yourself, and you start moving. Here is another thing that almost no one tells you about motivation. You have the causal relationship entirely backwards. Most people believe that motivation comes first, and action follows, that you need to feel inspired before you start. But this is not how motivation actually works in the human brain. The neuroscience is clear, and it is counterintuitive. Action comes first. Motivation follows. The moment you start doing the thing, the moment you actually sit down, open the document, lace up the shoes, pick up the instrument your brain begins to generate, the very feeling of motivation you thought you needed to begin. There is a neurological phenomenon called the action-motivation loop, and it explains why the hardest part of any task is almost always the first 2 minutes. Once you are moving, your brain catches up. Once you are engaged, momentum builds. But you have to move first. Waiting for the feeling is the trap. The feeling is the reward for starting, not the prerequisite. This means that the entire framework most people operate on, the wait until you feel ready approach, is neurologically backwards. You will never feel ready before you start. Readiness is something you feel after you have already begun. The disciplined person has internalized this truth so completely that they no longer look for the feeling of readiness. They know it is not coming before action. They know it only comes through action. And so they act. Not because they are special, not because they are made of different material, but because they understand the actual mechanics of how human motivation and performance operate, and they have aligned their behavior with that understanding. The single shift that will change everything for you is this. Stop asking yourself whether you feel like doing the work. That question is irrelevant. The only relevant question is whether the work needs to be done. And if it does, then it gets done today, in this moment, regardless of how you feel. The moment you make that decision and hold it unconditionally, you have stepped into the first real foundation of self-discipline. Everything else builds from here. Chapter 2. The Neuroscience of Self. Discipline. How your brain is wired against you and how to rewire it. To build genuine, lasting self-discipline, you first have to understand why it is so difficult, not in a vague, motivational way, at a biological level. Because the truth is that your brain is not broken, it is not weak, and it is not failing you. It is doing exactly what millions of years of evolution designed it to do. The problem is that what evolution designed your brain to do and what you need your brain to do in the modern world are in direct conflict. And until you understand that conflict at its root, you will keep blaming yourself for a war your brain was always going to fight against you. Start with the architecture of the brain itself. The part of your brain that drives discipline, long-term planning, impulse control, and the ability to delay gratification is called the prefrontal cortex. It is the most recently evolved part of the human brain, the seat of rational thought, of future-oriented thinking, of conscious decision-making. When your prefrontal cortex is active and in control, you can look at the long game. You can say no to the immediate pleasure in service of the greater goal. You can sit down and do the hard thing, even when everything in your body is resisting. The prefrontal cortex is the disciplined part of you. Now, here is the problem. Working in constant opposition to the prefrontal cortex is the limbic system, specifically the amygdala, which is the ancient, survival-oriented, emotion-driven part of your brain that has been around for hundreds of millions of years. The amygdala does not care about your goals. It does not care about your future. It does not understand ambition, or purpose, or long-term vision. It cares about exactly two things: seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. Right now, in this moment. And it is extraordinarily powerful. When the amygdala perceives threat, including the psychological threat of discomfort, uncertainty, or effort, it triggers a stress response that can completely overpower the prefrontal cortex. This is why you can know, with perfect clarity, that you should be working, and still find yourself reaching for your phone. You know the right thing to do. Your rational brain is clear, but your ancient brain, your survival brain, has hijacked the controls. This battle is not a character flaw. It is not laziness. It is not weakness. It is neurobiology. The limbic system is faster more automatic, and more deeply wired than the prefrontal cortex. In any situation of perceived discomfort, the ancient brain fires first. The rational brain has to work to catch up. And in that gap, that fraction of a second, between the impulse and the conscious response, most people fall. They scroll instead of work. They sleep instead of train. They eat the easy thing instead of the right thing. Not because they lack intelligence or desire, because the older part of their brain is winning the reflex race. Understanding this changes everything. Because once you understand what is actually happening, you can stop fighting yourself with shame and start working with the system. The goal is not to silence your ancient brain. That is impossible. The goal is to design your life in such a way that the path of least resistance, the automatic, reflexive, easy choice, leads directly to the disciplined behavior you want to build. You engineer the environment so that the limbic system, in its endless search for the easiest option, ends up choosing exactly what you need it to choose. But there is something even more profound going on at the neurological level, and it is the most important concept in this entire audiobook. It is called neuroplasticity, and it is your greatest advantage. For most of human history, scientists believed that the adult brain was fixed, that the neural connections you had in adulthood were the connections you were stuck with for life. That your patterns, your tendencies, your reflexes were permanent. We now know that this is completely false. The brain is extraordinarily malleable throughout your entire life. Every time you think a thought, every time you take an action, every time you choose discipline over comfort, you are physically reshaping the structure of your brain. Neurons fire together and wire together. This is not a metaphor. It is a description of actual synaptic strengthening. The more often a neural pathway is activated, the more myelin builds around it, the faster the signal travels, and the more automatic the associated behavior becomes. This means that every single time you do the hard thing, every time you override the impulse to quit, to avoid, to distract, you are strengthening the neural circuitry of discipline. You are literally building a more disciplined brain. And every time you give in, every time you take the easy path when you had committed to the hard one, you are reinforcing the neural circuitry of avoidance. You are building a more avoidant brain. The brain you are wiring today is the brain you will be operating with tomorrow and next year and a decade from now. This should terrify you and excite you in equal measure. It means that your current level of discipline is not fixed. It means every choice is a vote for the brain you are building. Now here is the part that most people miss entirely. The dopamine system. Dopamine is widely misunderstood as the pleasure chemical. It is actually the anticipation chemical. It is released not when you receive a reward, but when you anticipate one. And your brain has been hijacked. Social media, junk food, entertainment platforms, all of these have been engineered by teams of the world's best behavioral scientists to trigger massive dopamine spikes through immediate, unpredictable rewards. And every time your brain gets a huge dopamine hit from something easy and immediate, it recalibrates its baseline. It requires more stimulation to feel satisfied. The small, delayed rewards of disciplined work, the satisfaction of a completed task, the pride of a kept commitment, the slow building result of consistent effort start to feel invisible next to the overwhelming signal of immediate gratification. Your brain is not choosing distraction because distraction is better. It is choosing distraction because distraction is louder. The rewiring process requires you to deliberately lower the stimulation volume, to reduce your exposure to high dopamine shortcuts so that the quiet rewards of disciplined effort become perceptible again. This is not about becoming a monk. It is about rebalancing a system that has been artificially skewed. When you begin to reduce the noise, something remarkable happens. The act of finishing a hard workout begins to feel genuinely satisfying. Completing a full hour of focused work produces a real sense of reward. Keeping a commitment to yourself starts to carry emotional weight. Not because those things changed, but because your brain's reward calibration has been restored enough to actually register them. This is the neuroscience of discipline in its most practical form. You are not fighting your brain, you are teaching it. You are showing it through repeated experience where the real rewards are. And the more consistently you do this, the more the neural pathway of discipline strengthens, the more automatic disciplined behavior becomes, and the less effortful it feels. It never becomes effortless, but it becomes easier, reliably, measurably, and permanently easier. That is the promise of neuroplasticity, and it is the foundation on which everything in this audiobook is built. Chapter 3. The Identity Shift. You don't need more discipline. You need a different self-image. Here is a question that almost no one asks when they try to build self-discipline. They ask how to do it. They look for techniques, strategies, hacks, systems, and strategies matter. You will get many of them in this audiobook. But there is a deeper question that must be answered first, because without answering it, no strategy will stick. The question is not, how do I become more disciplined? The question is, who do I believe I am? Because here is the uncomfortable truth. Your behavior, in the long run, will always be consistent with your identity, not with your goals, not with your intentions, not with the techniques you try. With your identity, with the story you tell yourself about who you are. If somewhere in your operating system, in the deep background code of your self-concept, you believe that you are someone who struggles with discipline, who gives in when things get hard, who starts things but does not finish them, then your behavior will find its way back to that identity, no matter how good your strategy is. You will use the technique for a week, for a month, maybe for 3 months, and then something will go wrong and you will fall back. And some quiet internal voice will say, "See, I knew I could not really do this." And that voice is not a verdict. It is just a belief. And beliefs can be changed. Most people approach behavior change from the outside in. They decide on an outcome. They want lose 20 pounds, build a business, wake up early every day. And they try to work backward from that outcome to the behaviors that will get them there. This is the outcome-based approach, and it has a fundamental weakness. Every time you hit an obstacle or fall off track, the failure reinforces the very identity you are trying to escape. You tried and failed to wake up at 5 a.m. for 2 weeks. And now you have more evidence that you are not a morning person. You tried and failed to stick to the diet. And now you have more evidence that you cannot control yourself around food. Every attempt and failure in an outcome-based approach builds a thicker wall of negative identity. The approach that actually works is the opposite. It works from the inside out. It starts not with the outcome you want, but with the identity you need to inhabit. Instead of starting with the goal of running a marathon, you start with the identity of being a runner. Instead of starting with the goal of reading 50 books, you start with the identity of being a reader. Instead of starting with the goal of building an empire, you start with the identity of being someone who builds. And then every action, no matter how small, becomes a vote for that identity. Every time you go for a 10-minute run, you cast a vote for the identity of being a runner. Every time you read even one page, you cast a vote for the identity of being a reader. Every time you do the work, even when you do not want to, you cast a vote for the identity of being disciplined. The power of this shift is almost impossible to overstate. When you are trying to achieve an outcome, the question you ask before every action is, will this get me to my goal? And when the result feels far away or uncertain, the answer can feel like no. And the action becomes optional. But when your actions are votes for an identity, the question becomes, is this what a disciplined person does? And the answer is always binary and always clear. You are either casting a vote for the person you want to be, or you are casting a vote against them. There is no ambiguity, and there is no waiting. This is also why the language you use about yourself matters enormously. When you say, I am trying to be more disciplined, the word trying signals that discipline is not yet part of your identity. It is something external you are reaching for. But when you say, I am someone who does not miss commitments, or I am someone who does hard things, or simply, I am disciplined, you are doing something neurologically significant. You are activating the consistency drive, which is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. Human beings have a deep, wired need to act in ways that are consistent with their stated identity. When you publicly or privately declare who you are, your behavior bends toward that declaration with remarkable force. This is not positive thinking. It is not affirmation magic. It is behavioral consistency theory, and it is documented extensively in psychological research. The shift from wanting discipline to being disciplined is not something that happens in a single moment of decision. It is something that is built through accumulated evidence. And this is where patience becomes critical. You cannot decide today that you are disciplined and have your brain believe it immediately. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine, and it will not update your self-concept until the evidence demands it. So your job is to build the evidence. Slowly, deliberately, through small, consistent actions that each cast another vote for the identity you are choosing. One kept commitment leads to another. One acted-on decision leads to the next. And gradually, the accumulated weight of that evidence tips the scale. The identity shifts. And when the identity shifts, the behavior stops feeling like discipline and starts feeling like expression. You are no longer forcing yourself to do the hard thing. You are simply being who you are. There is one more layer to this that is worth sitting with. The old identity, the one that defined you as undisciplined, as someone who always gives in, as someone who cannot follow through that identity, was not your true self either. It was a story that was built over time through repeated experiences, many of which you did not consciously choose. A failed attempt here, a habit broken there, feedback from someone who doubted you, years of treating yourself as the kind of person who does not follow through. That story accumulated until it felt like fact, but it was never fact. It was always just a story. And the most important thing you can understand right now is that you are the author. You always were. And you can begin writing a different story, starting with the very next choice you make. Chapter 4. Building the foundation, the daily systems that make discipline automatic. At some point in this conversation, you might be waiting for me to give you a tip, a trick, a hack, some shortcut that will make discipline painless and effortless. And if that is what you are waiting for, here is the truth. It does not exist. But here is what does exist. And it is far more powerful than any shortcut. It is the principle of design over willpower. It is the understanding that the most disciplined people in the world are not the ones who work hardest against their own impulses. They are the ones who have designed their lives so intelligently that they rarely have to fight their impulses at all. They make the disciplined choice, the automatic choice. They build systems that carry them forward so that the decision is made before the moment of temptation ever arrives. The cornerstone of this approach is what behavioral scientists call pre-commitment. Pre-commitment is the act of making a decision in advance, in a calm and rational state, and then locking that decision in place so that the future, emotional, tired, resistant version of you cannot override it. Ulysses had himself tied to the mast before sailing past the sirens. He knew that in the moment he would not be able to resist. So he removed the choice before the moment arrived. This is not weakness. This is intelligence. The smartest thing you can do about discipline is decide things before you are in a state where deciding is dangerous. What does pre-commitment look like in practical terms? It looks like laying out your training clothes the night before. It looks like having your work tools ready and open when you sit down. So the first thing you see is the task and not the temptation. It looks like blocking distracting websites during your work hours with a tool that prevents you from unlocking them without significant friction. It looks like telling someone else about your commitment so that social accountability now holds you when your own resolve might not. It looks like scheduling your most important work at the same time every single day, so that the question of whether you will do it today never has to be asked, because the answer was given weeks ago. Every time you pre-commit, you are protecting your future self from the worst instincts of your present self. And that is not a weakness, it is the highest form of self-awareness. Closely related to pre-commitment is the elimination of decision fatigue. You already know from the chapter on motivation that willpower depletes throughout the day. What you may not have fully internalized yet is that every trivial decision you make, what to eat, what to wear, what to do next, whether to take this meeting or that one, consumes the same cognitive resource as your most important choices. The more decisions you make throughout the day, the less cognitive capacity you have left for the decisions that actually shape your future. This is why many of the most prolific performers in history were famous for radical simplicity in their daily lives. The same meals, the same wardrobe, the same schedule, repeated with minimal variation, not because they were boring or uncreative, because they understood that the energy spent deciding what to eat for lunch is energy taken directly from what could be spent on their most meaningful work. You do not need to live with that level of austerity. But you do need to identify the areas of your life where trivial decisions are bleeding your most important resource. And you need to systematize those areas ruthlessly. Automate your meals for the week on Sunday. Choose your work blocks and protect them with the same seriousness You would give a meeting with the most important person in your industry. Create defaults for every low-stakes decision so that your brain is never spending premium fuel on cheap problems. Every time you eliminate a trivial decision, you are banking that energy for the moments that matter most. Now let us talk about the architecture of the actual day, because this is where discipline lives or dies. Your day has an internal rhythm, a pattern of high energy and low energy, of peak focus and necessary rest. And if you build your schedule in alignment with that rhythm, discipline becomes dramatically easier. If you fight against it, you are spending twice the effort for half the result. For most people, the first 2 to 4 hours after waking are the window of highest cognitive clarity and prefrontal cortex dominance. This is the window where the ancient brain is least loud, where the rational brain has the most control, where your capacity for focus and resistance is at its peak. This is the window you must protect with absolute ferocity. Whatever your most important work is, the work that actually moves your life forward, the creative work, the strategic work, the deeply challenging work that requires your full self, it belongs in this window. Not email, not social media, not administrative tasks, not responding to other people's priorities. Your most important work, protected in a block of time that you treat as sacred. Before you open a single app, before you check what the world wants from you, before you let the noise in, you work. You do the thing that matters most. And you do it for as long as your peak focus window holds. The keystone habit is another concept worth understanding deeply. A keystone habit is a single habit that, by its nature, tends to pull other positive behaviors into its orbit. Regular, intense exercise is the most documented keystone habit in behavioral science. When people build a consistent exercise practice, they do not just get fitter. They spontaneously start making better food choices. They start sleeping better. They start working more productively. Their stress levels drop. Their relationships improve. Not because they tried to change all of those things, but because the discipline required for the exercise habit begins to generalize across their behavior, and the identity of being someone who respects their body starts to influence every adjacent decision. Choose your keystone habit with care, because the right one is a lever that moves far more than just itself. Build it first. Build it solidly. And then watch what it begins to move. Finally, understand that the daily system is not built in a day. It is not built in a week. You do not design the architecture all at once and then execute it perfectly from day one. You build one piece at a time. You master one habit before adding the next. You create stability before you create complexity. The temptation when you are fired up and motivated, which is exactly how you feel right now, is to redesign everything simultaneously. New morning routine, new diet, new workout plan, new work schedule, new evening practice, all at once. And then in 3 weeks, when the initial excitement fades and life pushes back, the whole structure collapses, and you feel worse than you did before you started. Do not do this. Build one thing, make it solid, then build the next. A system built slowly is a system that lasts, and a system that lasts is how you build a life. Chapter 5. The War on Comfort. Why easy is slowly killing your potential. There is something that nobody around you is going to tell you. Because most people around you are in the same trap without knowing it. They will not tell you because to say it would be to admit something about themselves that they are not ready to admit. So I'm going to tell you instead, and I need you to really hear this. The comfortable life is the most dangerous life you can live. Not because comfort is evil, not because relaxation and rest are wrong, but because the comfort trap is invisible. It is cumulative. And by the time most people notice it, they have lost years, sometimes decades, to a life that was always just slightly below what they were actually capable of. Here is how the trap works. Every time you choose the comfortable option over the challenging one, your brain records the transaction. Not consciously, automatically. It records that the level of challenge you face today was higher than necessary, and it adjusts your baseline accordingly. Your nervous system recalibrates downward to protect you from the discomfort you chose to avoid. And this recalibration is not neutral. It is not simply returning you to zero. It is actively reducing your capacity, your tolerance for difficulty, for uncertainty, for sustained effort. All of it is biological. All of it is use it or lose it. And all of it atrophies in direct proportion to how long you have been avoiding it. Think about what happens to a muscle that is never challenged. It does not simply stay the same. It weakens. Slowly, without dramatic announcement, it loses its capability. The same is true for your mental and psychological capacities, your ability to focus for extended periods, your ability to tolerate frustration without quitting, your ability to push through discomfort to completion, your resilience in the face of setbacks. These are not fixed traits. They are capacities, and they require regular challenge to remain intact. Every time you avoid the challenging conversation, you make yourself slightly less capable of having it next time. Every time you take the shortcut in your work, you make yourself slightly less capable of depth the next time depth is required. Every time you hit snooze instead of honoring the commitment you made the night before, you make it slightly easier to hit snooze again tomorrow. Comfort compounds, and the compound effect of comfort is a smaller life, a weaker self, and a growing gap between who you are and who you were meant to become. The word comfort itself is worth examining. It comes from the Latin confortare, to strengthen greatly. Somewhere along the line, the meaning inverted entirely. What we now call comfort is the opposite of strength. It is the management of sensation in the short term at the direct cost of capability in the long term. Real comfort, the kind that is sustainable, the kind that is earned, the kind that actually satisfies, comes on the other side of challenge. It comes after the hard training session, not before. It comes after the difficult creative work is done, not during the avoidance of it. It comes after you have proven to yourself, once again, that you are capable of more than you initially wanted to accept. That version of comfort is not the enemy of discipline. It is the reward of it. Here is something that biology confirms and that most people never take seriously enough. The human organism was not designed for stillness and ease. It was designed for movement, for challenge, for overcoming obstacles. When you place the human body and mind in a state of chronic ease and absent challenge, something goes wrong at a physiological level. Chronic comfort is associated with higher cortisol dysregulation, with decreased neurogenesis, the creation of new brain cells with poorer cognitive function, with increased rates of anxiety and depression, and with a profound loss of meaning. You were not built to sit still. You were not built to avoid difficulty. And when you try to do those things systematically, you feel it, not as dramatic breakdown that would be too obvious, as a quiet, persistent sense that something is missing, that you are capable of more and choosing less, that the gap between your actual life and your possible life is widening in ways you cannot quite articulate. That is the weight of unchosen challenges accumulating in your nervous system. The antidote is not suffering. The antidote is chosen difficulty. There is a concept in psychology called eustress, positive stress, and it is the biological opposite of the distress caused by threats you cannot control. Eustress is the stress you voluntarily take on when you pursue a challenge that stretches you. The hard workout, the project at the edge of your skill level, the conversation you are nervous about having, the habit that requires something from you every single day. Eustress activates growth hormone. It promotes neuroplasticity. It increases dopamine receptor sensitivity. It builds psychological resilience. It is literally the biological mechanism through which you become more. And you access it only through deliberate, chosen difficulty. Not through catastrophe, not through punishment, but through the simple, daily act of doing something harder than you wanted to do. But let us go even deeper into what chronic comfort costs you at the level of meaning. Because this is where the conversation gets most honest. Human beings do not only need safety and pleasure, they need the experience of being tested and not breaking. They need the evidence gathered through their own life that they are capable of hard things. This evidence is not something you can borrow from someone else's story, or absorb from a motivational video, or generate through thought alone. It can only be built through direct experience, through the actual doing of the difficult thing. And when you systematically avoid that experience, you do not just lose fitness or productivity or skill. You lose your relationship with your own capability. You start to genuinely believe, at a gut level, that no amount of intellectual confidence can override, that you cannot handle much, that hardship will break you, that the difficult thing is probably beyond you, and that belief built through years of choosing easy becomes a prison so familiar it stops feeling like a prison at all. It just starts feeling like who you are. This is why the war on comfort is the first and most fundamental battle of self-discipline, not because discomfort is inherently good, but because your capacity for discomfort is the ceiling of everything else you want to achieve. Your tolerance for difficulty determines how far you are willing to go. Your ability to stay in the fire when everything in you wants to run determines whether you will reach the results that require staying in it. And that tolerance, that ability, is not something you are born with in a fixed amount. It is something you build, expand, and train every single day, one hard choice at a time, one kept commitment at a time, one moment of choosing growth over ease, potential over comfort, the person you could be over the person it would have been easier to remain. You were not put here to be comfortable. You were put here to grow. And growth requires resistance. That is not a motivational metaphor. It is physics. Chapter 6. The Discipline of Focus. How to do one thing deeply in a world designed to fracture your attention. There is a war being fought over your mind right now, not metaphorically, literally. There are rooms full of the world's most brilliant engineers, behavioral psychologists, and neuroscientists, whose entire professional purpose is to capture your attention and hold it hostage for as long as possible. Every notification, every autoplay, every infinite scroll, every algorithmically curated feed has been engineered with a precision that most people have no idea they are up against. And the casualty of this war, the thing that is quietly being destroyed in the process, is your ability to focus. Your ability to stay with one thing long enough for it to become meaningful. Your ability to go deep. And without depth, without the capacity for sustained, undivided attention, discipline becomes nearly impossible. Because discipline is not just about showing up. It is about what you are capable of doing once you are there. Here is something that should concern you deeply. The average human attention span has declined dramatically over the past 2 decades, in direct correlation with the rise of smartphones and social media. But what is more alarming than the statistic itself is the mechanism behind it. Every time you switch your attention from one thing to another, every time you check your phone mid-task, glance at a notification, or allow your mind to wander to a different problem, you pay what neuroscientists call an attention residue cost. Your brain does not switch cleanly. It drags fragments of the previous task into the new one, and it takes an average of 23 minutes to fully return to a state of deep focus after an interruption. 23 minutes. That means that a single distraction in the middle of a focused work session does not cost you the 30 seconds it took to check the message. It costs you nearly half an hour of peak cognitive performance. Most people never get there at all, because the next interruption arrives long before the recovery from the last one is complete. This is the hidden tax on a distracted life. It is not just that you are spending time on things that do not matter. It is that the constant switching is actively degrading your brain's capacity for the kind of deep, sustained focus that produces your best work, your most creative solutions, and your most significant results. The ability to think deeply, to sit with a difficult problem long enough to actually penetrate it, to write a paragraph that requires you to hold multiple complex ideas simultaneously, to build something that demands your full cognitive presence, is not just a nice to have. It is the competitive advantage that separates people who produce merely adequate work from people who produce extraordinary work. And it is a capacity that is being eroded quietly and continuously every time you reach for your phone without thinking. The discipline of focus is therefore not a soft skill. It is not a personality preference or a temperamental advantage some people have and others do not. It is a trainable cognitive muscle. And like all muscles, it responds to deliberate practice and deteriorates with neglect. The question is not whether you are naturally a focused person. The question is whether you are building your focus capacity or destroying it with your daily habits. And the honest answer, for most people living in the modern world, is that they are destroying it. Not through malice or weakness, through the accumulated effect of 1,000 small, unconscious decisions to let the noise in. So how do you build it back? You start with the understanding that focus is a state, not a switch. You cannot simply decide to focus the same way you decide to stand up. Focus is a neurological condition, a specific pattern of brain activity, involving high coherence between the prefrontal cortex and the task-relevant regions of the brain. And it requires conditions to emerge. The two most important conditions are removal of competing stimuli and sufficient time. You cannot focus deeply in an environment full of interruptions, no matter how strong your will. And you cannot reach depth in a 5-minute window, no matter how motivated you are. Deep focus requires that you create a protected environment and that you stay in it long enough for your brain to settle, descend, and engage at its full capacity. This is why the single most powerful focus practice you can implement is the protected work block, a period of time typically between 90 minutes and 3 hours, during which you work on your single most important task with zero access to interruptions. Phone off or in another room. Notifications disabled. Browser tabs closed except those required for the task. The door shut. The environment designed to make distraction require effort rather than focus requiring effort. Most people have never experienced what their mind is actually capable of producing in a properly protected 3-hour block. Because most people have never actually had one, they have had sessions they called focused that were actually interrupted every 8 minutes. A real, uninterrupted, properly designed, deep work session produces more meaningful output than most people generate in an entire day of fractured, distracted effort. There is another dimension to the discipline of focus that almost never gets discussed, and it is the internal one. Because even if you remove all external distractions, even if you put the phone away, close the tabs, and sit in silence, there is still the internal noise to contend with. The wandering mind, the intrusive thoughts, the background anxiety, the part of your brain that, the moment it is deprived of external stimulation, generates its own. Learning to work with your wandering mind rather than against it is a skill that takes time and deliberate practice. Mindfulness training, the practice of noticing when your attention has drifted and returning it to the intended object without judgment, is not a spiritual exercise. It is a cognitive training protocol, and the research on its effects on focus and attention is some of the most robust in behavioral neuroscience. The act of noticing your attention has drifted and choosing to return it is, at a neurological level, a bicep curl for your focus muscle. Every return strengthens the circuitry. But perhaps the most important thing you can understand about the discipline of focus is this. In a world where almost everyone is scattered, the person who can genuinely focus is almost unfairly advantaged. When everyone else is producing work at the quality level that a distracted, fragmented attention makes possible, and you are producing work at the quality level that 3 hours of genuine deep focus makes possible, you are not competing in the same category anymore. You are not working harder. You are working in a fundamentally different mode. And the results reflect that difference so dramatically that it can look, from the outside, like natural talent. It is not talent. It is the compounded return on the decision to protect your attention as the non-renewable resource it actually is. Your attention is the most valuable thing you own. Every company with a screen wants it. Every social platform is designed to take it. Every notification is a request for it, and you get to decide who it goes to. The discipline of focus is simply the practice of making that decision consciously, deliberately, and in alignment with what actually matters to you. Start there. Build the protected block. Show up for it every single day, and watch what becomes possible when the most powerful tool you have, your undivided mind, is finally aimed at the right target. Chapter 7. Emotional Regulation. How to keep moving when every feeling is telling you to stop. Let us be completely honest about something that most conversations about self-discipline carefully avoid. The moments when discipline matters most are not the easy days. They are not the days when the work feels good, when the results are coming, when the momentum is high and the progress is visible. The moments when discipline matters most are the days when you feel terrible, when the work feels meaningless, when you are exhausted in a way that sleep does not fix, when something in your personal life has knocked you sideways, when you look at everything you are trying to build and feel not inspired, not motivated, not determined, but empty, hollow, utterly without the energy to take even one more step forward. Those are the days that decide everything. And whether you can act on those days is almost entirely a function of one thing: your ability to regulate your emotions without being controlled by them. Emotional regulation is not the same as emotional suppression. This distinction matters enormously because the most common mistake people make is trying to push their emotions down, to ignore them, to tell themselves that feelings are irrelevant and that the disciplined person simply overrides them through sheer force. This approach fails consistently and for a very specific reason. Suppressed emotions do not disappear. They accumulate pressure, and eventually, through burnout, through explosive behavior, through physical illness, through the kind of complete collapse that renders you non-functional for days or weeks, they demand to be acknowledged. The path of suppression is not the path of discipline. It is the path of a pressure cooker with no release valve. It looks fine, right up until the moment it does not. Genuine emotional regulation is something different and something far more sophisticated. It is the ability to experience your emotions fully, to acknowledge them without judgment, and to choose your behavior independently of them, to feel the exhaustion and act anyway, to feel the doubt and continue anyway, to feel the grief or the anxiety or the frustration or the overwhelm, and without pretending those feelings do not exist, without fighting them, without needing them to go away first, choose the next right action regardless. This is what the most emotionally regulated, most consistently disciplined people actually do. They are not robots. They feel everything. They simply do not let the feeling decide. The foundational skill here is what psychologists call affect, labeling the act of naming your emotional state clearly and specifically. Research by neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman at UCLA has demonstrated that when you name an emotion not vaguely, as in "I feel bad," but precisely, as in "I feel afraid that this work will not be good enough," the activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, measurably decreases. The simple act of labeling the emotion shifts processing from the reactive limbic system to the more regulated prefrontal cortex. You literally think your way into a calmer state, not by denying the feeling, but by naming it accurately. This is not pop psychology. It is a documented neurological mechanism, and it is one of the fastest and most accessible emotional regulation tools available to you. The next layer is the practice of cognitive reframing, deliberately changing the meaning you assign to a situation without changing the facts of the situation. When your results are not coming as fast as you expected, and you interpret that as evidence that you are failing, the emotional consequence is despair, which generates behavior consistent with giving up. But when you reframe that same situation, the results are not here yet because I am in the building phase, and building always feels slow before it feels fast. The emotional consequence is patience, which generates behavior consistent with continuing. The facts did not change. The timeline did not change. The only thing that changed is the story you told yourself about what the facts mean. And that story is always, in every situation, a choice. Not always an easy choice, but always a choice. Another tool that transforms emotional regulation is what behavioral scientists call the observational self, the capacity to watch your own mental and emotional states as if from a slight distance, without being completely fused with them. Most people, when they feel a difficult emotion, become entirely identified with it. The feeling is all-consuming. There is no space between the emotion and the self. But through practice, specifically through practices like mindfulness, meditation, journaling, or even simply pausing before reacting, you can develop the capacity to observe your emotions rather than be overwhelmed by them. To notice, I am feeling fear right now, rather than experiencing the fear as an undifferentiated identity. And the moment that observational distance opens up, choice becomes possible. You can feel the fear and ask, is this fear telling me something important? Or is this just my nervous system responding to novelty and discomfort? And more often than not, it is the latter. And when it is the latter, you can thank the feeling for trying to protect you and move forward anyway. This capacity for emotional regulation is also where the relationship between discipline and self-compassion becomes clear, and it is a relationship that surprises most people. There is a widespread assumption that self-discipline requires harsh self-treatment, that in order to push yourself to do hard things, you need to berate yourself when you fall short, shame yourself back into action, use self-criticism as a motivational tool. Research in performance psychology and clinical psychology converges on exactly the opposite conclusion. Self-criticism activates the threat response, which activates the amygdala, which depletes the very prefrontal cortex resources you need for disciplined action. It creates shame, and shame generates avoidance, not action. The person who treats themselves harshly after a failure is, counterintuitively, less likely to return to the difficult behavior than the person who treats a failure with the same compassion they would offer a close friend. Self-compassion is not softness. It is not lowering your standards. It is the recognition that you are more likely to try again, push harder, and sustain the effort when you treat yourself as worthy of effort, rather than when you use failure as evidence of your inadequacy. The disciplined person is not someone who never feels overwhelmed, never feels like stopping, never feels the full weight of doubt and exhaustion and resistance. The disciplined person is someone who has learned to feel all of those things and act anyway, who has built the internal capacity to let the emotions move through them without being moved by them, who understands that a feeling is whether it arrives without permission, it changes without warning, and it passes without asking, and that while the weather is happening, the work still goes on, because the work does not wait for the weather, and neither do you. Chapter 8. The compound effect of discipline. Why consistency beats intensity every single time. Most people dramatically overestimate what they can do in a day and almost criminally underestimate what they can do in a year. This mismatch, this fundamental miscalibration of the human imagination when it comes to time, is responsible for more abandoned goals, more broken commitments, and more lives that fell short of their potential than almost any other single factor, because it leads people to operate in bursts. To sprint hard for 2 weeks when the motivation is high, and then collapse when the results have not materialized fast enough. To restructure everything on January 1st, and abandon the restructuring by February. To invest enormous energy in short, intense periods, and then recover in equally long periods of nothing. And this pattern, this cycle of intensity and collapse produces almost nothing in comparison to what a modest, daily, relentless consistency produces over the same period of time. The mathematics of consistency are almost unfair in how powerful they are. There is a concept in physics called compound interest, the idea that a quantity that grows by a fixed percentage each period becomes exponentially larger over time, not linearly. Most people understand this in the context of finance. They understand that a small amount of money invested consistently and left to compound becomes a large amount of money over decades. What they have not fully applied to their own lives is that the same mathematics govern every area of human performance. Every skill, every habit, every capacity you are building obeys the laws of compounding. And just as compound interest is nearly invisible in the early periods and then suddenly dramatically visible later, disciplined consistency produces results that feel negligible at first, and then become impossible to ignore. Here is the concrete reality of this. If you improve at something by just 1% every single day, if your work gets 1% better, your health 1% better, your skills 1% sharper after 1 year of compounding, you are not 1% better. You are 37 times better. 37 times. That is the mathematics of 1%, compounded daily, over the course of a year. Now, flip it. If you decline by 1% every day, if your standards slip just slightly, if you make just slightly worse choices, if you skip just one more thing than you should, after 1 year, you are reduced to 3% of where you started. The same mechanism that builds extraordinary performance when directed toward growth destroys it when directed toward decay. And the difference between the two trajectories is not dramatic. It is 1%. It is the sum of 1,000 tiny daily choices that feel, in the moment, almost irrelevant. This is the deepest argument against intensity and in favor of consistency. The person who trains at brutal intensity for 3 weeks and then burns out and takes 2 weeks off is not competing with the person who trains at moderate intensity every single day without exception. They are not even in the same conversation. Because the person who trains every day is compounding. Their fitness is built on yesterday's fitness, which was built on the day before. Each session adds to a base that grows continuously. The person who trains in bursts is repeatedly starting over. Each return from a break requires them to rebuild what the break undid. They are working hard, sometimes extremely hard, but they are not compounding. And without compounding, there is a ceiling, an invisible cap on the results that intensity alone can produce. That consistent daily practice has no ceiling at all. The hardest part of understanding this is that compounding is invisible at the start. When you commit to a daily writing practice and sit down for the first time, the page looks the same as it would have looked without the commitment. When you start training every day, your body looks the same after day 1 as it did before day 1. When you spend an hour every morning learning a new skill, you do not feel smarter at the end of the day. The feedback loop is almost non-existent in the early period. And this is where most people lose the thread. They look for evidence that the consistency is working, and they cannot find it yet. and they interpret the absence of visible evidence as evidence that the approach is wrong. So they switch approaches. They try something more dramatic, something that promises faster results. And in doing so, they step off the compounding curve just before it was about to become visible. They abandon the investment right before it begins to pay the returns they could not yet see. The antidote to this, the thing that keeps you on the compounding curve when the results are not yet visible, is a shift in what you measure. Instead of measuring outcomes, which are lagging indicators that take time to reflect your inputs, you measure process. You measure whether you showed up today, whether you did the thing, not whether the thing is producing results yet, but whether you honored the commitment. The goal is to build a streak, an unbroken chain of kept commitments that becomes its own form of evidence. Not evidence that the results are coming. Evidence that you are becoming the kind of person who does not stop. And that evidence, accumulated day by day, is the foundation that everything else is eventually built on. There is also something profoundly important to understand about the relationship between consistency and quality. When you operate in bursts of intensity, you tend to produce your best work in the early, high-energy phase, and your worst work toward the end when you are running on fumes. The results are inconsistent, and the inconsistency makes it hard to learn from your process or to build on previous work. But when you operate in daily, consistent practice, something different happens. You get better at getting started. You get better at working from a cold start. You develop a relationship with the work that does not depend on the emotional state you bring to it. And the result is not just more work. It is more consistent quality, a floor that rises over time as your skill base deepens and your process becomes more refined. Consistency is the mother of mastery. And mastery, not any single brilliant performance, not any one moment of intense effort, is the thing that changes a life. Let one more thing be said about this chapter before we move forward, because it is the piece that ties everything together. Consistency is not glamorous. It does not make good highlight reels. Nobody posts a video of the 73rd consecutive day of showing up for their practice, because the 73rd day looks exactly like the first day from the outside. There is no dramatic transformation visible in any single session. There is no inflection point you can point to and say, that is the day everything changed. The compound effect is invisible until it is undeniable. This is why most people never experience it. They quit before the mathematics become visible. They stop compounding just before the curve turns vertical. And then they wonder why the people who kept going seem to have achieved so much more while working so much less hard. They did not work less hard. They worked less dramatically. They traded the spike for the slope, and the slope sustained, daily, unbroken, became the most extraordinary advantage of all. Chapter 9. Discipline under pressure, how to hold your standards. When life is trying to break you. Everything in this audiobook so far has been about building discipline under normal conditions, about establishing the systems, the identity, the emotional regulation, and the consistency that allow you to perform at your highest level when life is relatively stable. But here is the truth that separates the people who build lives they are proud of from the people who build lives that collapse under the first serious weight. Real discipline is not tested in the calm. It is tested in the chaos. It is tested when the loss comes, when the relationship ends, when the health scare arrives, when the business fails or the career hits a wall or the plan that was supposed to work simply does not. When the pressure is so high and the emotional weight so heavy that the very idea of maintaining your standards feels not just difficult, but absurd. Those moments, not the ordinary mornings and unremarkable afternoons, are the true test of everything you are building. And the first thing you need to understand about discipline under pressure is that it is a different skill from discipline under normal conditions. It requires an additional layer of understanding and preparation. Most people, when they face a major life disruption, a loss, a crisis, a sustained period of difficulty, either abandon their standards entirely and go into survival mode, or they try to maintain everything exactly as it was and break themselves in the attempt. Both of these responses are wrong, and both of them come from the same misunderstanding. That discipline is an all-or-nothing proposition, that you are either fully maintaining your standards or you have failed, that there is no middle ground between perfect adherence and complete collapse. There is a concept that the most resilient performers in the world use, and it is one of the most practical and important ideas in this entire audiobook. It is called the non-negotiable minimum. The non-negotiable minimum is a version of your standard that has been deliberately reduced to its absolute core, the smallest possible expression of the commitment that still counts as keeping it. When life is normal and resources are full, you operate at your full standard. You do the full workout, the full work session, the full morning routine, the full practice. But when life is crushing you, when the weight is real and the energy is genuinely depleted and the emotional load is genuinely heavy, you do not abandon the commitment. You drop to the non-negotiable minimum, the 10-minute walk instead of the hour of training, the one paragraph written instead of the full chapter, the 5 minutes of the practice instead of the hour. The smallest possible action that keeps the identity intact, keeps the streak alive, keeps the commitment from being abandoned. This matters for a reason that goes beyond the physical or productive value of the minimum itself. When you are under severe pressure and you manage to honor your commitments even at a reduced level, you are sending a message to your nervous system and to your self-concept that is worth more than the action itself. The message is, I do not quit when it gets hard. My standards have a flaw. When everything else in my life is chaotic and uncertain, this commitment remains. I am still the person I said I was going to be. Even today, even in this. That message, repeated through your behavior in the hardest moments, builds a kind of psychological bedrock, a core of self-trust and identity, solidity, that becomes the foundation every other aspiration in your life is built on. The person who maintains their minimum through a genuine crisis knows something about themselves that cannot be learned any other way. They know that their standards are real, not aspirational, not conditional, real. There is also something important to understand about how pressure affects decision-making and why pre-committed systems matter even more in difficult periods than they do in normal ones. Under high stress, the prefrontal cortex, the disciplined, rational, future-oriented part of your brain, loses processing power. The stress hormones that flood your system during a crisis are specifically designed to redirect resources away from long-term thinking and toward immediate threat response. This means that under pressure, you are neurologically less capable of making disciplined decisions in the moment than you are when life is stable, which means that the decisions must be made before the pressure arrives. The systems must be in place before the crisis comes. Because when you are in the middle of it, You do not have the cognitive resources to design your response from scratch. You only have the resources to execute what was already decided. This is why the pre-committed system is not just a convenience for easy times. It is a lifeline for hard ones. When everything is falling apart and you are running on empty and the emotional weight is crushing, and the last thing you have energy for is a decision about what to do next. The system decides for you. The routine runs. The minimum executes. The commitment, reduced but intact, holds. And in the holding of it, through the pressure and the weight and the exhaustion and the doubt, you become someone who is genuinely unbreakable. Not because nothing can hurt you, but because nothing can make you quit. And that distinction between being immune to pain and being immune to collapse is the heart of what real discipline actually is. One more truth about discipline under pressure that deserves to be spoken plainly. The hardest moments, the genuine crises, the deep losses, the periods of sustained difficulty are also the periods of fastest growth. Not because pain is inherently educational, but because your response to difficulty reveals your actual character in a way that comfortable success never can. You do not know what you are made of when things are going well. You discover what you are made of when everything is going wrong, and you have to choose in real time who you are going to be. Every person who has ever built something significant has a story of a period when it all seemed impossible, when the rational response would have been to stop, when the weight was genuinely too much, and they continued anyway. Not because they were superhuman, because they had built, through deliberate practice in ordinary times, the capacity to hold their course when the ordinary times ended. That capacity built now, in this season, in whatever ordinary moments you have available, is the thing that will carry you through the extraordinary moments you cannot yet see coming. Build it now, while you still can. Chapter 10. The Morning Architecture. Why the first hour of your day is the blueprint for everything that follows. There is a pattern so consistent among high performers across disciplines, across cultures, across centuries, that it is almost impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The people who produce the most, who maintain the highest standards most consistently, who build the most meaningful lives they are, almost without exception, intentional about how they begin their days. Not in the superficial sense of following a trendy morning routine because they read about it in a self-help article, but in the deep, structural sense of understanding that the first hour of the day is not just the first hour. It is the hour that sets the neurological, emotional, and behavioral tone for everything that follows. It is the hour in which you establish who is in charge of your day, you, or the demands and distractions of everyone and everything else. Here is what happens in the first moments after you wake up, if you allow it to happen without intention. Your phone receives the first touch. Notifications flood in messages, emails, social media updates, news alerts. Before your prefrontal cortex has fully come online, before the executive function of your brain is operating at anything close to its full capacity, your attention has been seized by other people's priorities. You are already reactive, already in response mode, already allowing the external world to write the first chapter of your day before you have had a chance to write it yourself. And once you are in that reactive state, it is extraordinarily difficult to shift out of it. The tone has been set, the neurological priming has occurred, and the rest of the day tends to continue in the direction those first moments established. The alternative, the architectural approach to the morning, begins with the understanding that the brain upon waking is in a profoundly suggestible plastic state. During the transition from sleep to waking consciousness, there is a period of heightened neurological receptivity in which the inputs you receive are processed with unusual depth and integration. What you expose your mind to in this window, the first thoughts, the first information, the first emotional stimuli, has a disproportionate impact on the cognitive and emotional architecture of your entire day. This is not mysticism. It is neuroscience. The morning brain is a different brain from the afternoon brain. It is more malleable, more open, more capable of deep imprinting. And that window is either used deliberately or surrendered by default. The morning architecture is the intentional design of that window. It is the deliberate sequencing of inputs and activities in the first portion of your day to prime your nervous system, sharpen your focus, establish your identity, and ensure that the most important work of your life receives the best cognitive resources you have to give. It is not a rigid prescription. The specific elements will vary by person, by life stage, by the nature of the work. But the underlying principle is universal. Protect the morning from the reactive world and use it to establish the internal state that the rest of the day will need to sustain. The first element of a powerful morning architecture is the absence of external input in the earliest minutes. Before you reach for the phone, before you turn on the news, before you engage with any outside stimulus whatsoever, you give your mind a period of quiet ownership of itself. This might be 5 minutes, it might be 30, but in this window, the mind belongs to you, to your thoughts, your intentions, your inner landscape, rather than to the inputs that will spend the rest of the day competing for its attention. Many of the most productive thinkers in history describe this early morning quiet period as the source of their best ideas and their clearest thinking. Not because of anything magical about early morning silence, but because it was the one window in which the mind was free from external agenda, free from reactive processing, free to operate on its own terms. The second element is physical activation. Movement in the morning, even moderate, even brief, produces a cascade of neurological benefits that directly support the discipline you will need throughout the day. Exercise stimulates the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, often described as fertilizer for the brain, which promotes neuroplasticity and enhances cognitive function. It also raises dopamine and serotonin baseline levels, increases prefrontal cortex activity, and reduces the cortisol that builds up overnight. The person who moves their body in the morning is neurologically more prepared to do hard cognitive and behavioral work than the person who does not. This does not need to be an intense training session, though. If that is your keystone habit, the morning is its ideal home. Even a 10-minute walk produces measurable neurological effects that support a more disciplined day. The third element is intentional, priming the deliberate establishment of your mindset, your priorities, and your identity at the start of the day, rather than waiting for the day to establish them for you. This might take the form of journaling, in which you write out your most important intention for the day, the person you are committed to being, and the single thing that would make the day a success. It might take the form of visualization, in which you spend several minutes mentally rehearsing the day you intend to have, seeing yourself executing the work with focus, handling the inevitable resistance with discipline, completing the commitments you made to yourself. It might take the form of reading something that reinforces the values and identity you are building. The specific form matters less than the principle. Before the day writes its story on you, you write your story on the day. The fourth element, and perhaps the most important, is the protection of your peak cognitive window for your most important work. Everything described above is preparation. The morning architecture is not a substitute for the work. It is the scaffolding that makes the work possible at its highest level. And immediately following the preparation, while the prefrontal cortex is still operating at peak capacity, while the dopamine from the morning movement is still active, while the priming has established the right identity and intention, you go directly to the work that matters most. Not email, not meetings, not administrative tasks. The singular, most important thing on your agenda, met with the full force of your morning brain at its peak state. This is where the magic happens, not in the routine itself, but in what the routine makes possible. This morning architecture is not a luxury. It is not something for people with flexibility in their schedules and no real responsibilities. It is a structure that can be built around almost any life, almost any constraint, almost any obligation, if the decision is made that it is worth building around them. It might require waking 45 minutes earlier. It might require going to sleep 30 minutes earlier the night before to make that possible. It might require a renegotiation of how the first hour of your day is used, at the cost of some convenience or comfort. But the return on that investment, the neurological readiness, the emotional stability, the identity clarity, the cognitive peak preserved for your most important work, compounds over time in ways that make the sacrifice look trivial in retrospect. The morning is the first brick in everyday structure. Lay it with intention, and everything built on top of it stands straighter. Lay it carelessly, and everything built on top of it leans on a crooked foundation. Choose every day to lay it with care. Chapter 11. Discipline in relationships. How to hold your standards without losing the people you love. There is a conversation about self-discipline that almost never happens, and its absence leaves a dangerous blind spot in the lives of people who are serious about growth. The conversation is this: discipline does not exist in a vacuum. It exists inside a life. And a life contains other people, partners, parents, children, friends, colleagues, whose rhythms, needs, and expectations will constantly push against the structure you are trying to build. And if you do not navigate that tension with both clarity and care, you will find yourself forced into an impossible choice between the standards you are committed to and the relationships you cannot afford to lose. The person who builds discipline without building relational wisdom often ends up with impressive results and an empty house. And that is not a life. That is just a performance with no audience that matters. Let us start with the most common and most damaging mistake that growth-oriented people make in their relationships. It is not that they care too little about the people around them. It is that they begin to operate from an implicit assumption, usually unconscious, almost always unspoken, that the people in their lives should either adopt the same standards they are building or get out of the way. This assumption, even when it is never articulated, is felt. Partners feel it as a quiet but persistent judgment. Friends feel it as a growing distance. Family members feel it as a withdrawal of the warmth that used to be unconditional. And the result is not that the relationships improve as the person improves. The relationships deteriorate. precisely at the moment when the person's life is expanding most dramatically. The human connections that give that life its meaning begin to contract. The first thing you must understand is that your discipline is yours. It is not a gift you are giving to the people around you by showing them how it is done. It is not a standard they have implicitly agreed to be measured against. It is a personal commitment you have made about your own life, and it carries no automatic authority over anyone else's. The moment you begin to import your standards into your judgment of others, the moment your discipline becomes a lens through which you see the people you love as lacking, you have crossed from growth into arrogance. And arrogance, even when it is built on genuine achievement, is a relationship destroyer without peer. What genuine discipline in relationships looks like is something quieter and more demanding than leading by example or setting a high bar for those around you. It looks like the discipline of patience, staying present with people who are growing at a different pace than you, without making them feel the weight of the comparison. It looks like the discipline of listening, actually listening, not waiting for your turn to redirect the conversation toward the lessons you have learned. It looks like the discipline of full presence, putting down the work, closing the screen, and giving the people who matter the same quality of attention you give your most important tasks. Because here is a truth that the productivity literature almost never tells you. The people in your life are not interruptions to your work. They are the reason the work matters. And if the work consumes everything, and the people get whatever is left over, you have not built discipline. You have built a machine that has forgotten what it was built for. There is also the specific challenge of boundaries, of protecting the time and energy your discipline requires without communicating to the people you love that they are less important than your goals. This is genuinely difficult. And anyone who tells you it is not has probably not tried it in the context of real, demanding, long-term relationships. What makes it navigable is communication, not once, not as a declaration, but as an ongoing conversation, telling the people in your life what you are building and why, inviting them into the vision rather than presenting them with the requirements, asking for their support rather than assuming their compliance, and reciprocating, protecting time for connection with the same discipline you protect time for your work. Not because connection is a recovery tool, but because it is a primary good, as fundamental to a well-lived life as any achievement you are working toward. The deepest form of discipline in relationships is the discipline of honesty. The courage to have the difficult conversation rather than accumulating the quiet resentments that destroy relationships from the inside out. The willingness to say what is true even when the truth is uncomfortable, because the alternative, the slow corrosion of unspoken grievances, is far more destructive in the long run than any short-term discomfort honesty creates. Disciplined people are often good at doing hard things in their work and their physical lives. They are sometimes far less practiced at doing the hardest interpersonal thing of all, being fully honest with the people they love about what they need, what they feel, what is not working, and what they are afraid of. That honesty, practiced with the same consistency and courage you bring to every other hard thing in your life, is what keeps the most important connections in your life alive as everything else grows. There is one final dimension of relational discipline that almost no one discusses, and it is the discipline of gratitude, of actively acknowledging the people who make your ambitions possible. The partner who absorbs more than their share of the household so you can protect your work block. The friend who shows up on the hard days even when you have not had much time for them lately. The colleague who covers for you when the deep work requires you to be unavailable. These contributions are invisible in the accounting of individual achievement, but they are never invisible to the people making them. And the discipline of seeing them, naming them, and expressing genuine gratitude for them is not just a relational nicety. It is a form of honesty, the honest recognition that no extraordinary life is ever built entirely alone, that behind every impressive individual achievement is a network of human support that deserved and deserves to be acknowledged. Your relationships are not separate from your discipline. They are part of it, arguably the most revealing part, because anyone can be disciplined in solitude. The real test of who you are becoming is whether the growth you are pursuing makes you more or less of the person the people around you need you to be. Chapter 12. Discipline in your career: how to outwork, outthink, and outlast everyone in the room. Let us talk about work. Not work as a concept, not work as an abstraction, but the actual daily reality of showing up in a career or a craft or a business and choosing day after day to operate at a standard that most people around you are not choosing. Because the truth about professional excellence is more uncomfortable and more straightforward than most career advice will tell you. It is not primarily about talent. It is not primarily about opportunity or timing or network or luck, though all of those play a role. It is primarily about the relentless, daily, unglamorous application of discipline to the craft, about showing up when others do not, about going deeper when others go wide, about doing the work that needs to be done after the meeting ends and everyone else has gone home, because you have not yet produced what you know you are capable of producing. The single most consistent differentiator between people who build careers of genuine distinction and people who spend their careers in quiet frustration capable of more, perpetually delivering less, is not ability. The ability gap between the top performers in almost any field and the average performers is far smaller than most people imagine. What is not small is the consistency gap, the standard gap, the "I will do this whether I feel like it or not" gap. The most successful professionals are rarely the most naturally gifted. They are the ones who have refused to allow their output to be governed by their emotional state on any given day, who have separated the quality of their work from the quality of their mood, who have understood, at a level that actually changes behavior, that the work is the job, not the inspiration to do the work, not the ideal conditions for doing the work, but the actual act of producing, improving, and delivering every single day, regardless. There is a specific practice that separates the people who grow fastest in their careers from those who plateau, and it is called deliberate practice. It is different from regular practice or simple experience. And the difference is everything. Most people, once they reach a level of competence in their profession, stop actively developing. They do the work. They produce adequate results. They maintain the skill level they have already achieved without ever seriously pushing beyond it. This is comfortable. It is also, over the long arc of a career, catastrophic. Because the world does not reward maintenance. It rewards growth. And the comfort of competence, the ease of doing what you can already do well, is one of the subtlest and most dangerous forms of the comfort trap we discussed earlier. Deliberate practice is the antidote. It is the practice of specifically targeting the areas of your performance that are weakest The skills you find most difficult, the work you are most tempted to avoid because you are not yet good at it, and spending significant time in that zone of difficulty. It is not enjoyable. The zone of deliberate practice is by definition the zone of current inadequacy. And sitting in your inadequacy while trying to improve it is uncomfortable in a way that ordinary work is not. But it is also the only mechanism through which genuine skill growth occurs. The only pathway to becoming, over time, someone whose level of capability is genuinely exceptional rather than merely adequate. And in a world where most people are coasting on the skill level they reached 5 years ago, the person who is still in deliberate practice, still growing, still developing, still pushing into their edge, becomes progressively more formidable with every passing year. The career discipline also requires an honest reckoning with output quality. Not a harsh or self-critical one, but an honest one. Most professionals develop, over time, an unconscious standard for what is good enough. And that standard is almost always calibrated to what the environment around them accepts rather than to what they are actually capable of producing. They do work that passes. That gets approved. That meets the bar that has been set, without ever seriously asking what it would look like if I gave this everything I actually have, without ever pushing the quality to the level where they genuinely do not know if they can do any better. The person who disciplines themselves to consistently ask that question and to keep working until the answer is yes, this is the best I can currently do, produces work that stands apart not because they are more talented, but because they have a different relationship with the concept of enough. There is also the matter of time, of how you use the hours of your professional life. The majority of people spend the majority of their working hours on tasks that create the appearance of productivity without producing anything that genuinely advances their most important objectives. Emails answered, meetings attended, administrative tasks completed, shallow tasks substituted for deep ones because the shallow tasks are easier, more immediately rewarding, and socially safer. The discipline of a serious professional is the discipline of saying no to the meeting that does not need you, to the task that someone else could do, to the urgent request that feels important but is not, to all the things that fill the day with busyness and leave the most important work undone. Every no to a low-value activity is a yes to the work that actually matters. And accumulating enough of those yeses consistently over years is how careers of real distinction are built from the inside out, without waiting for permission, without waiting for the perfect opportunity, without waiting for anything except the discipline to act. There is also something worth saying about the discipline of professional courage. The willingness to do what your honest judgment tells you is right, even when the social and institutional pressure is pushing in a different direction. Most workplaces have a gravitational pull toward conformity, toward the safe choice, toward the opinion that will not make anyone uncomfortable. The disciplined professional resists that pull not through recklessness or contrarianism, but through the quiet, consistent practice of expressing what they actually believe with clarity and respect, even when the room wants to hear something easier. This kind of professional courage is rare. It is also, over time, one of the most powerful career differentiators available. People do not follow the person who always agrees. They follow the person who can be trusted to tell them the truth. Finally, understand this. The person who outworks outthinks, and outlasts everyone else in the room is not necessarily the person who spends the most hours at their desk. They are the person who spends the most hours in genuine, focused, high-quality engagement with the work that matters most. Quantity without quality is just noise, but quality applied consistently, over time, at the standard of the very best you are capable of producing, that is a force that compounds. That is a career. That is the thing that, 10 years from now, people look at and call talent, when what it actually was, all along, was discipline. Chapter 13. Physical discipline. Why the body is the training ground of the mind. If there is one domain of discipline that is more foundational than all the others, one area where the habits you build or fail to build ripple outward into every other part of your life with unusual force, it is the physical body. Not because fitness is more important than financial discipline, or career discipline, or relational discipline, but because the body is not separate from the mind. It is the physical substrate the mind runs on. And the way you treat that substrate, whether you train it or neglect it, challenge it or coddle it, nourish it or abuse it, directly determines the quality of every cognitive, emotional, and behavioral output you are trying to optimize everywhere else. This connection between physical discipline and mental performance is not a motivational claim. It is deeply, extensively documented in neuroscience. Exercise, specifically sustained cardiovascular exercise and resistance training, produces a cascade of neurological effects that directly enhance the capacities discipline requires. It increases baseline dopamine and serotonin, improving mood stability, and reducing the emotional volatility that makes discipline difficult. It stimulates the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the protein responsible for neuroplasticity and the growth of new neural connections. It reduces baseline cortisol, the stress hormone that impairs prefrontal cortex function and makes disciplined decision-making harder. It improves sleep architecture, which is the primary mechanism through which the brain consolidates learning, regulates emotion, and restores the cognitive resources depleted by the demands of the day. Every aspect of physical training produces a neurological environment in which discipline is easier, and every day of physical neglect produces a neurological environment in which discipline is harder. But the more profound argument for physical discipline is not neurological. It is psychological and identity-based. When you train your body to do hard things, when you push through the resistance, when you finish the session you wanted to quit halfway through, when you show up for the workout, when the easiest and most comfortable thing would be to stay in bed, you are doing something that goes far beyond the physical benefit of the training itself. You are proving to yourself, in the most visceral and undeniable possible way, that you can do things that are hard, that you can feel the resistance and continue anyway, that your body is not in charge, that the discomfort does not get to make the decision, and that proof accumulated through hundreds of training sessions, through thousands of individual moments of choosing to continue, becomes the bedrock of your self-concept. It becomes the evidence that your identity as a disciplined person is real, not aspirational. This is why people who maintain a consistent physical training practice tend to report improvements across virtually every other area of their lives, even areas that seem entirely unrelated to fitness. It is not that running makes you a better writer, or that lifting weights makes you a better parent. It is that the identity built through physical discipline, the deep, embodied knowledge that you are someone who does not give up, who shows up even when it is hard, who keeps the commitment even when no one would know if you broke it, generalizes. It transfers. The self-concept built in the gym or on the road or on the mat does not stay confined to those spaces. It follows you everywhere. It changes how you approach every challenge, every resistance, every moment in which the easy option is to stop. There is also the matter of energy, of the raw, physical and cognitive fuel available for everything else you are trying to do. Most people treat their energy level as a fixed resource, something that happens to them rather than something they manage. They feel tired and interpret that tiredness as a signal that they should rest more, work less, take things easier. Sometimes that signal is correct, but far more often, in the lives of people who are physically sedentary, the tiredness is not a sign of doing too much. It is a sign of doing too little of the physiological torpor that settles into a body that is not being regularly challenged, not being adequately stimulated, not receiving the circulation and oxygenation and hormonal activation that physical training produces. The counterintuitive truth, confirmed by overwhelming research, is that regular intense exercise dramatically increases energy availability. The people who have the most energy, who can work longer, think more clearly, and maintain their emotional regulation under pressure, are almost always the people who are physically training consistently. Not because they started with more energy, but because they built it. Sleep deserves its own moment in this conversation, because it is the most neglected physical discipline and arguably the one with the most catastrophic consequences when it is violated. Sleep is not rest. Sleep is a neurological process of critical importance. It is during sleep that the brain clears metabolic waste products through the glymphatic system, consolidates memories, resets emotional reactivity, restores prefrontal cortex function, and balances the hormonal systems that regulate appetite, mood, and stress response. Chronic sleep deprivation, meaning consistently getting less than 7 to 9 hours for most adults, produces cognitive impairment equivalent to legal intoxication, dramatically increases impulsivity and emotional reactivity, destroys the capacity for sustained focus, and makes disciplined decision-making in every other domain measurably harder. You cannot optimize your discipline while systematically undermining the neurological foundation it depends on. Sleep is not a luxury. It is infrastructure. Treat it with the same protective discipline you bring to your most important work. Nutrition operates on the same principle. The brain is an organ, and like all organs, it is made from and powered by what you put into it. The relationship between dietary quality and cognitive function, emotional regulation, and capacity for sustained effort is not subtle. It is dramatic and well documented. This is not a prescription for any particular diet. It is a recognition that the choices you make about what to eat are not just choices about your body weight or your health markers. They are choices about the quality of the instrument with which you are trying to do everything else in this audiobook. A brain running on processed food, refined sugar, and chronic dehydration is not the same instrument as a brain running on adequate protein, complex carbohydrates, healthy fats, and sufficient water. They are genuinely different machines. And the discipline to treat your body as the primary tool of your ambitions, not as an afterthought, not as a separate concern from your professional and personal goals, but as the foundation that all of those goals are built on, is one of the highest leverage disciplines you can build. Start with the body. Train it. Fuel it. Rest it. challenge it daily, and watch how the discipline you build there becomes the root system from which every other discipline in your life grows. Chapter 14. The Dark Side of Discipline. Avoiding burnout, obsession, and the trap of becoming your own warden. This chapter is going to say something that the previous 13 have been building toward but have not yet said directly. Self-discipline, without wisdom, without balance, without the capacity for self-compassion and genuine rest, does not build a life. It builds a prison that looks, from the outside, like extraordinary productivity and admirable commitment. A prison whose walls are made of your own standards and whose guard is your own inner critic. And the person inside it, despite all the achievement, despite all the boxes checked and goals met and commitments kept, is not free. They are trapped in a compulsive relationship with doing, an inability to simply be, a deep and growing anxiety that the moment they stop pushing, everything they have built will collapse. That is not discipline. That is a different problem wearing discipline's clothes. Burnout is the most obvious manifestation of discipline without wisdom, and it is far more than tiredness. True burnout, the kind that the World Health Organization now classifies as an occupational phenomenon, is a state of chronic physical and emotional exhaustion, accompanied by a profound sense of meaninglessness and detachment from the work and the life you have been building. It does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates over months and sometimes years through the sustained violation of the boundaries between effort and recovery, through the chronic treatment of rest as laziness, through the persistent refusal to acknowledge that the human system, like any high-performance system, requires regular maintenance and recovery to continue operating at its peak. Ignore the maintenance long enough, and the system does not simply underperform. It fails. Completely, dramatically, and in ways that can take years to fully repair. The discipline of recovery is not the opposite of discipline. It is a component of it. The highest-performing athletes in the world do not train more hours than their competitors as a matter of course. They train with more quality, and they recover with more precision. The recovery is not downtime between the real work. The recovery is part of the performance strategy, a non-negotiable component of the system that makes sustained peak performance possible. Sleep, rest, genuine leisure, time spent in connection and play and beauty, and the kind of experience that has no instrumental value whatsoever. These are not indulgences you have earned by working hard enough. They are biological necessities without which the working hard is not sustainable. And sustainable is the word that matters, because the goal is not to perform at your highest level for 6 months and then collapse. The goal is to perform at a genuinely excellent level for decades, and decades require recovery. There is a subtler form of the dark side of discipline that is harder to identify and harder to escape, and it is the creeping conflation of your identity with your output. When discipline becomes your primary identity, when who you are is inseparable from what you produce, you have set yourself up for a crisis. At the first moment, your output is interrupted. Illness, injury, circumstance. Seasons of life that genuinely require less production. All of these become existential threats, rather than ordinary variations in a rich life. The person whose entire self-worth is built on their productivity is terrified of rest, because in rest, they encounter the question of who they are when they are not producing. And if they have never built an answer to that question, the encounter is unbearable. The antidote to this is the deliberate cultivation of identity that is not contingent on performance. The recognition that you are not your output, that your worth as a human being is not a function of your productivity, your achievements, your discipline score, your morning routine, or any other measure of what you do. That beneath all of it, beneath the ambition and the systems and the standards, there is a self that exists simply by existing, that deserves care and rest and joy for no reason other than that it is alive. Building discipline without building this recognition does not produce a free and powerful person. It produces a high-achieving, quietly desperate one. And quiet desperation, however well it dresses, is not the life this audiobook is trying to help you build. Perfectionism is another dark side of discipline that deserves to be named and examined. Perfectionism is discipline's corrupted twin. It looks like high standards from the outside, but it operates from an entirely different internal mechanism. Genuine discipline is the commitment to doing your best and then releasing the outcome. Perfectionism is the inability to release anything that does not meet an impossible standard. A standard that, because it is impossible, can never be met, which means the perfectionist is in a state of permanent inadequacy, regardless of how much they achieve. The perfectionist does not finish things, because finishing requires accepting that the work is done when it is not yet perfect. The perfectionist avoids beginning things, because beginning makes failure possible. The perfectionist uses the pursuit of excellence as a weapon against themselves, as the constant justification for never being enough. Recognizing the difference between genuine high standards which produce output, which celebrate progress, which hold the imperfect result with satisfaction and pride, and perfectionism, which produces paralysis and suffering, is one of the most important acts of self-awareness a disciplined person can perform. Finally, there is the danger of imposing your discipline on others through judgment. When you have built strong standards for yourself, when you have felt the genuine transformation that consistent discipline produces, there is a natural temptation to see the people around you who have not built those standards as lesser, as failing, as making choices that are beneath them. And this is wrong, not only relationally, as we discussed in the chapter on discipline in relationships, but epistemically. You do not know the full context of anyone else's life. You do not know what they are carrying, what they have already overcome, what discipline they are quietly building in areas invisible to you. Your standards are yours. Hold them with pride, but hold them without contempt for anyone who holds different ones. The most disciplined person in the room is rarely the most judgmental one. They are too busy building their own life to audit anyone else's. Discipline in its truest form is not a cage. It is a tool. It serves the life. It does not become the life. Build it with wisdom, rest within it, and never allow the structure you build to become more important than the person you are building it for, which is you. The full, complex, irreducible, worthy of care human being who exists beneath every goal and every system and every kept commitment. Chapter 15. The person you become. Why doing hard things daily is the ultimate investment you will ever make. Everything in this audiobook has been building toward this final truth. Not a strategy, not a system, not a technique. A truth, the deepest and most important one about self-discipline, and the one that, if you actually absorb it, not intellectually, but in the place where it changes the way you move through the world, will render everything that came before it not just useful but inevitable. The truth is this: the real product of self-discipline is not what you achieve. It is who you become. Think about that carefully. Because almost every conversation about discipline, including most of the conversations we have had in this audiobook, is framed around the things discipline helps you accomplish. The business you build, the body you develop, the skill you master, the career you advance, the financial freedom you create. And those things are real. They matter. The external results of a disciplined life are significant and worth pursuing, but they are not the most significant thing. The most significant thing, the thing that outlasts any single achievement, the thing that compounds over a lifetime in a way that no external result can, is the person you are in the process of becoming through the daily practice of doing hard things. Here is what that person looks like, and why who they are matters more than anything they have ever done. The person who has built genuine self-discipline over years of consistent practice is someone who trusts themselves, not in the fragile, conditional way that most people trust themselves, the way that says, "I trust myself, as long as the conditions are right, and the challenge is not too great, and I feel reasonably good about my chances." But in the deep, unconditional way that can only be built through having been tested and not broken, through having faced the resistance and continued, through having kept the commitment on the days it would have been so easy to abandon it, through having proven, in the only way proof is actually possible through direct experience, that when things get hard, you do not collapse. You continue. You adjust. You find a way. That self-trust, built through years of kept commitments, is the most valuable thing a human being can possess. More valuable than money, more valuable than talent, more valuable than opportunity. Because a person who truly trusts themselves is capable of doing something with every opportunity that presents itself, while a person who does not trust themselves will squander even the best ones. The disciplined person has also built something that most people spend their entire lives searching for in the wrong places. They have built a relationship with their own integrity. Integrity in the original sense of the word, integration, wholeness, the alignment between what you say you will do and what you actually do. Most people live with a quiet, chronic internal dissonance, a persistent awareness that they are not fully being the person they said they wanted to be, that the gap between their stated values and their daily behavior is real and widening. This dissonance does not announce itself dramatically. It settles in as a background hum of low-level shame, of vague dissatisfaction, of a life that is fine but not full. The person who has built discipline has closed that gap, not perfectly, not completely, but meaningfully. They live in a closer alignment between who they said they would be and who they actually are. And that alignment produces a kind of peace, not complacency, not the absence of ambition, but a quiet groundedness in their own character that no external achievement can substitute for. There is also what happens to a person's relationship with fear when they have built years of doing hard things. Fear does not disappear. This is important to say clearly, because the idea that disciplined people are fearless is a myth that does a great deal of harm. The most disciplined, most consistently high-performing people in the world experience fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of trying and falling short, fear of all the things that genuine ambition puts at risk. What changes is not the presence of fear. What changes is the relationship with it. The person who has been doing hard things daily for years has enough direct experience of continuing through fear that the fear loses its veto power. It becomes one voice among many, a voice worth listening to, worth examining, worth taking seriously, but not the voice that makes the final decision. The decision is made by the deeper, more stable, more trustworthy part of the self. The part built through discipline. And that part has learned over and over again that the other side of the fear contains the thing that matters most. Consider, too, what a life of daily discipline does to your experience of time. Most people have a troubled relationship with time. They waste enormous quantities of it and then feel the guilt of having wasted it. They drift through periods of their life in a state of vague busyness that produces little of meaning. They arrive at the end of years with the disquieting sense that they passed without accumulating what they had hoped to accumulate in skill, in connection, in achievement, in becoming. The disciplined person experiences time differently. Because they are intentional about how they use each day actually registers. It accumulates. It builds on the one before it. The year does not disappear into a blur of distraction and deferred intention. It is a year of real choices, real effort, real growth, and real lived experience. The disciplined person, at the end of 10 years, looks back on a decade that actually happened, that was genuinely inhabited, rather than a decade that passed while they were waiting for the right conditions to begin. None of this means the disciplined life is without difficulty. Of course, it is not. The whole premise of this audiobook is that the disciplined life involves choosing difficulty deliberately every single day. It is not easier than the undisciplined life. In many immediate and obvious ways, it is harder. But here is the secret that only experience can fully reveal. The difficulty of the disciplined life is chosen difficulty, and chosen difficulty feels entirely different from the difficulty of a life where things happen to you. The disciplined person is not a passenger. They are not being carried by circumstances or swept along by the current of other people's priorities. They are the author, the agent, the one who decided, and there is a dignity in that. A deep, sustaining, unshakable dignity that makes every hard day feel different from the hard days that were not chosen. You chose this. You are here because you decided to be here. That is not suffering. That is living. So here is where we end. Not with a strategy, not with a final framework, with a question that you already know the answer to, because this audiobook has been helping you remember it. The question is, who do you want to be when you look back? Not what do you want to have achieved, though that matters. Not what do you want people to say about you, though that has its place. Who do you want to have been in the daily, ordinary, unremarkable, private moments when no one was watching and the choice was entirely yours? Because that is the only place the answer is ever built. In the private moments, in the moments of resistance, in the mornings when everything in you said not today and you did it anyway. In the evenings when you honored the commitment no one else would have known about if you had broken it. In all the small, uncelebrated, accumulating moments of choosing discipline over ease, growth over comfort, the person you could become over the person it would have been easier to remain. And here is the final thing, the thing that pulls everything together. Discipline is not a destination you arrive at. It is not a state of having finally become the person you were trying to be, after which the work is done, and the choices become easy. It is a daily practice, a daily recommitment, an act of choosing, again and again, in the face of all the same resistances and temptations and tiredness and doubt, to be the person you said you were going to be. The most disciplined people in the world are not people who graduated from the process. They are people who fell in love with the process itself, who found meaning not only in the results it produces, but in the act of choosing it every day, as an expression of who they are and what they stand for. That love, that relationship with the daily act of choosing growth over ease, is the final gift of a life lived with discipline. It is the thing that makes the hard days not just bearable but meaningful, the thing that turns the ordinary Tuesday morning into something worth inhabiting fully, the thing that allows you to look at the life you are building in all its imperfection and incompleteness and feel the quiet, solid, unshakable satisfaction of someone who knows they are giving it everything they have. That person, the one being built in those moments, is the real investment, the real return, the real reason everything in this audiobook matters. And they are waiting for you on the other side of the very next hard thing. Go build them, one day at a time, starting now.